My name's Evan, and the first time I realized my dad saw me as optional was the day I got my college rejection letter, not because I wasn't smart enough, but because the check I'd been told was waiting for me had already been spent. My whole life, Dad talked about the fund. He called it my golden ticket, the reward for all my late-night studying, the AP classes, the volunteering he insisted I do. He used to tell people at barbecues, Evan's going places. We're setting him up right. I believed him. Mom died when I was 10. It was just the two of us for a while, awkward dinners, silent car rides to soccer practice, both of us trying to be normal. Then he met Melissa. She had a kid too, Jacob. He was my age, but different in every way. Where I was quiet, he was loud. Where I tried to blend in, he took up all the air in the room. Dad loved him for it. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. So what if Dad laughed louder at Jacob's jokes? So what if he skipped my debate tournament to see Jacob's lacrosse game? I had the fund. I had my plan. I'd get out, get my degree, build my own life. I'd make him proud, or at least make him notice. Senior year, I got into my dream school, a small private college with a killer creative writing program. The acceptance letter felt like proof that I mattered. I showed it to Dad at the dinner table. He just nodded. Good for you, Evan. Then he went back to talking with Melissa about Jacob's campus tour at some state school. Weeks later, the financial aid office called. There was a problem. The college fund wasn't there. I went home that night, heart pounding, and asked him what was going on. He didn't look up from his laptop. Just muttered, there were expenses, Evan. I had to help Jacob get settled. He needed the money more than you did. You're resourceful. You'll figure it out. That was it. My entire childhood of, we're saving this for you, turned into be grateful you even got the scraps. I remember staring at him across the kitchen island, the same place he used to make my lunch before school, and realizing I could disappear tomorrow and he wouldn't flinch. So I did what he said. I figured it out. I deferred my acceptance, took a warehouse job, started saving. I moved out before graduation and couch surfed until I could afford a tiny room in the city. No help. No calls. He didn't check in. Neither did Melissa. Years passed. I built something from nothing. Freelance gigs turned into steady work. Nights in front of a borrowed laptop turned into a small publishing deal for a short story collection. I clawed for every inch on my own. I didn't go home for holidays. Didn't get invited anyway. Then one night, scrolling through social media, I saw Jacob's graduation photos. Dad and Melissa on either side of him in his cap and gown. Big smiles, matching ties, the caption, our pride and joy. Not a word about me, like I never existed. It should have crushed me. Instead, it focused me. They wanted to pretend I wasn't real? Fine. But they didn't get to rewrite history without my say. I spent the next year finishing my degree online while working full-time. I networked with editors, did open mic readings, and pitched pieces everywhere that would have me. I put my name on everything, no pen names, no ghostwriting. I wanted it attached to me, visible, undeniable. Then, I got my break. A magazine editor loved my essay about broken promises and parents who trade their kids for convenience. She published it. It went viral. Book deals followed. Speaking invites. TV spots. Suddenly, my name, the name he tried to erase, was everywhere. But that wasn't the move. Not yet. That was just me building my own platform, my own voice, so when the moment came, I'd know exactly how to use it. The real move started the night my publisher invited me to headline a charity gala. The guest list? Local pillars of the community, business owners, donors, politicians. Including my father and his perfect new family. He was on the board of the very scholarship foundation hosting the event. The one that used my face on their brochures when I was 12, before they quietly stopped including me. I RSVP'd yes. Sat at the front table. Waited. And when it was my turn to speak, I stepped onto that stage with my old family 15 feet away, frozen in their tuxes and cocktail dresses, and told the real story. I told them about the fund. The betrayal. The kid who slept on friends' couches while his dad paid for someone else to have the life he'd promised me. And then I looked right at them and thanked them. Because without that betrayal, I said, I never would have learned to build myself from ashes. Never would have found the grit to stand here now, looking them in the eye. No longer a ghost. When I finished, the room was silent, except for the applause that started at the back and swept forward until it swallowed up the table where they sat. The donors they tried so hard to impress turned to me instead. That was the moment. The move that turned their perfect illusion upside down. And I wasn't done yet. After that night at the gala, word spread fast. My speech was clipped and shared online, thousands of views turned into millions. Local news outlets called me for interviews. Podcasts wanted my story. It wasn't just about a college fund anymore. It was about what it means when family betrays you and what you do with that pain. I'd worried, at first, that people would see me as petty, like I was just airing dirty laundry. But the truth resonated deeper than I expected. I got messages from people I'd never met, telling me how they, too, had been written off by parents, replaced by new families, left to fend for themselves. I became a symbol for every kid who'd been told they didn't matter. And while my name rose, so did the questions about my dad. He was on boards, foundations, charity committees. His image was devoted father, successful community man. He'd spent years polishing that reputation. And now people were asking, why didn't you help your own son? The same people who used to slap his back at fundraisers were side-eyeing him, wondering what else he was hiding. I could have stopped there. I'd made my point. I'd reclaimed my story. But I knew that if I let this moment pass, they'd spin it, sweep it under the rug, and keep pretending I was just bitter or exaggerating. So I made my next move. I started a scholarship in my mother's name. Not my dad's. Not mine. Hers. The woman who'd scrimped and saved before she died, who'd opened the first savings account for me when I was 6, teaching me how to count pennies in a glass jar. I took my first royalty checks and put them straight into that fund. It wasn't a flashy amount at first, but it was real. Enough to send one kid, someone overlooked, like I'd been, to college every year. No strings attached. No promises broken. No favorites. Just opportunity, the way it should have been for me. I didn't do it quietly, either. I announced it on the same local news channel that loved my dad's charity work. Sat down with their anchor in a bright studio, talked about the vision, the mission, the name, my mom's name, and why it mattered. When the anchor asked if my father was involved, I said, no. He chose someone else's future over mine. I'm building this so no one else has to feel the way I did. If that stung him, I wouldn't know. He never called. Never texted. Not a single word. But I saw the fallout, the polite distance other board members put between themselves and him. The questions from donors who wondered how much of the money they gave was being used the way it was meant to be. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was a reckoning. The version of him they bought into couldn't survive the truth. And I didn't lift a finger to lie. I just told what happened. I let people decide for themselves who they wanted to stand with. Meanwhile, I was busy living the life he said I'd figure out on my own. I got invited to speak at universities I'd once begged him to pay for. I'd walk through old brick hallways and lecture halls, shaking hands with kids whose eyes sparkled with the same dreams I'd had. Except they knew now that one betrayal didn't define them forever. At one event, a boy came up to me, probably 18, gangly and awkward, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. He said, my stepdad told me college was a waste, that I'd never make it. But I applied for your mom's scholarship. I'm here because you didn't give up. I remember walking out into the parking lot that night and just sitting in my car, staring at the wheel. For the first time in years, the anger slipped off my shoulders. I realized I didn't need an apology anymore. I didn't want one. I'd taken the worst thing my dad did to me and turned it into something that would outlive us both. But I still had one thing left to do. Not for the internet, not for the public, for me. Because while they were squirming under the spotlight, they still had each other. Their perfect family built on the ashes of mine. And I knew if I didn't confront it face to face, part of me would always wonder if he really understood what he'd done. So I called him. For the first time in years. When he picked up, there was that familiar flat tone, the same one that used to dismiss me so easily. Evan, what do you want? I told him I wanted to come by. To talk. Just once. He agreed. Maybe he thought he could salvage his image, or convince me to shut up. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't coming to ask for anything. I was coming to return something he'd stolen without even realizing it. When I pulled up to my dad's house, their house now, it looked exactly the same as the last time I'd stood on that porch as a teenager, keys in my pocket, backpack over my shoulder, wondering if he'd chase after me when I walked away. Spoiler, he didn't. Melissa answered the door. Her smile flickered when she saw me, like she couldn't decide if she should hug me or slam it shut. Evan, she said, voice brittle. We didn't expect. I called him, I said. He knows I'm here. She stepped aside. The entryway was lined with graduation photos of Jacob, kindergarten, high school, college. I knew there'd be none of me on those walls. It didn't even sting anymore. It felt like an old bruise I could poke at without flinching. Dad was waiting in the kitchen, leaning against the counter like he'd been caught off guard. He hadn't aged much, but the tightness around his mouth was new. Maybe all the questions about me from his polished friends had started to wear him down. Good. Evan, he said, stiffly. You've been busy. That's one word for it. He gestured to a chair at the island. I didn't sit. I didn't want to feel like a kid in timeout again. Instead, I pulled an envelope from my pocket, not some legal notice or a check, but a photo. One Mom took of us when I was 5, me on his shoulders at the zoo, both of us laughing. Before Melissa. Before Jacob. Before all of it. I came to give this back, I said. You kept telling me the fund was for me. That you were setting me up for the future. That we were in it together. But you spent it on him. So this. I held up the photo, let him see his younger self beaming at a son he'd pretend didn't exist. This doesn't belong to me anymore. It's yours. Keep it with the rest of your illusions. His jaw twitched. Melissa hovered in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes darting between us. I wondered what she told herself at night, that it wasn't her idea, that she didn't encourage him to do it. Maybe she believed it. Evan, you don't understand, he started. I laughed. Couldn't help it. No, Dad. I understand perfectly. You wanted an easier son. One who didn't remind you of Mom. One who fit better with your news story. You got what you wanted. I'm just here to say you don't get to rewrite me out of it. He went quiet then. For the first time, he really looked at me. Not through me. Not at who he wished I was. At me, the man who didn't beg for help anymore. Who didn't flinch when the word family came up. Why now? He asked. Why all this? Why put this out in the world? Because you made me invisible, I said. And then you spent every year pretending you hadn't. I'm done with that. I'm not your ghost anymore. I slid the photo across the counter. He didn't touch it. Melissa stepped forward, her voice thin. You've made your point. What do you want now, Evan? Money? An apology? I looked at her, really looked, at the careful hair, the pearls, the worry that her perfect image was crumbling. I don't want anything. I came to show you what it feels like when someone takes your story and tells it truthfully. That's all. I could see it land, the panic, the guilt, the fear that maybe the people they wanted to impress would never look at them the same way again. And I didn't feel bad. Not 1 ounce. Because they'd taken everything they could from me and left me with scraps. And I'd turned those scraps into a life better than anything they'd planned for me. I turned to leave, but then paused at the door. By the way, I said, glancing back at my dad. You might want to watch the local news tomorrow. There's a piece on the scholarship. They're highlighting the first kid we're sending to college. Mom would have loved it. He flinched, just a flicker, but it was there. Good. Let him sit with that. I walked out without another word. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. The past was theirs to live with now. I had better things to build. Things that would last long after their polished life finally cracked. I didn't hear from him after that day in the kitchen. Not a word. No calls, no texts, no awkward attempt at some half-baked apology. And honestly, I didn't expect one. That visit wasn't about opening old doors, it was about slamming them shut for good. After I left their house, I drove straight to the small apartment I still rented downtown. Nothing fancy. Just enough space for my books, my beat-up desk, and a couch that turned into a guest bed when my friends crashed after late nights talking about stories and life and the kind of families we'd choose for ourselves one day. I sat on that couch for a long time that night. The photo he'd kept, the little boy on his shoulders, burned into my mind. It didn't make me sad. It made me grateful. Because the kid in that photo was still here. He just stopped asking to be carried. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into the scholarship work. I took every interview that came my way. Colleges, podcasts, local news, national news. People wanted to hear the story behind the story, the kid who'd been erased who refused to stay invisible. And every time I spoke, I made sure to talk about my mom. About how she taught me to hold on to my worth even when the people closest to you try to make you feel small. The more I spoke, the more kids applied. Emails poured in. Stories that broke my heart and lit a fire under me all at once. Kids whose stepdads called them freeloaders. Moms who told them to grow up when they asked for help. Families who split their love like a pie and left them the crumbs. I saw myself in every one of them. And I swore to myself they'd never stand alone the way I did. The foundation board, the people who once posed in photos with my father at galas, they couldn't ignore me now. They invited me to speak at their biggest annual benefit. A night designed to honor the biggest donors. I knew he'd be there, in his suit and tie, Melissa on his arm, Jacob probably somewhere nearby looking uncomfortable in the corner. Good. Let them squirm. When I stepped on that stage, I didn't tell them the same story again. They already knew the betrayal. They'd heard the headlines. This time, I talked about what came next. About how betrayal doesn't have to break you if you refuse to carry it around like a weight. About how you can use it to fuel something better. I told them about the first scholarship student, a girl named Yasmin whose father kicked her out when she came out as gay. She'd been living in her car when we found her application. Now, she was finishing her first year at the same private college that once rejected me when the check bounced. Full ride. No strings. I watched my dad's face from the stage, stone still, like he'd been carved out of marble. For once, I didn't care if he clapped. Afterward, people lined up to shake my hand. Old men who used to slap my dad's back and call him a family man. Women who whispered that my story gave them the courage to stand up for themselves. One guy slipped me his card, offered to triple the scholarship fund's endowment. Kids like you shouldn't fall through the cracks, he said. I pocketed his card and smiled. Kids like me learned to build the net themselves. By the time the night was over, my father and Melissa had ghosted out the side door. Couldn't even stand to face the questions they'd never really answered. Jacob lingered, though, found me by the catering table, his hands stuffed awkwardly in his pockets. We hadn't spoken since the day the fund vanished. I didn't know, he mumbled. His voice was quieter than I remembered. About the money. About how it happened. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't you ever wonder why you got everything and I got nothing? He looked like he might say yes, but then his shoulders slumped. I just thought you didn't want to be around us. You were always so distant. I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but because it was so on brand. He really didn't know. He'd been the golden child so long, it never crossed his mind to look for the bruises his good fortune left on someone else. You're lucky, I said finally. You got the version of him that gave a damn. Just remember it came at a cost. He nodded, eyes down. I didn't hate him. He'd been a kid, just like me. But he'd benefited from my erasure, whether he asked for it or not. And now he'd have to live with that, the way I'd lived with the opposite. Driving home that night, I rolled down the window and let the cold air hit my face. For the first time, the old ache wasn't there. No more ghost in my chest. Just room for what I'd built, what I'd keep building, the kids who'd never have to ask, am I worth it? Because someone before them had already answered. You are. The morning after that gala, I woke up to an inbox overflowing with messages, reporters wanting another quote, young writers asking for advice, distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years saying they'd seen me on the news, and they were so proud. It was funny how quick people are to claim you once you've proven you can't be ignored. I didn't reply to most of them. Instead, I went for a walk through my neighborhood, the same block I used to wander late at night, head full of stories and doubts, wondering if I'd ever be more than a footnote in someone else's family photo. I ended up at my favorite coffee shop, sat in the back corner with my laptop, and started writing the next grant proposal for the scholarship. We'd gotten 3 big donations since the gala. Enough to send 5 more kids to college next year, maybe more if we stretched it right. It felt right, sitting there in a place I'd once used for free Wi-Fi because I couldn't afford my own, drafting plans for kids who needed someone to believe in them. No board to appease. No father to impress. Just the work. The real work. A few weeks later, I got a plain envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name written in that stiff, slanted handwriting I knew too well. Inside was a check. No note. No apology. Just a number, enough to pay back what he'd stolen, plus a little extra. For a second, my hand shook. Old reflex. I could almost hear his voice. Be grateful for what you get. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I didn't need hush money. I didn't need him to make it right. I'd already done that myself. I endorsed the check straight to the foundation. Every cent. I didn't want $1 of his guilt money for myself. Let it send more kids through the doors he once slammed shut on me. Let it remind him every time he looked at his bank account that the only piece of my life he'd ever touch again was the part he'd tried so hard to take away. That summer, our first group of scholarship students graduated their first year. We threw a little party, nothing fancy, just pizza, music, and stories swapped between kids who felt like family in a way my blood never did. Yasmin made a toast. She raised her plastic cup of soda and said, "To Evan, for proving you don't need a perfect family to build something good that lasts." Everyone cheered. I just sat there, looking around at these bright, scrappy, unstoppable kids, and thought about the boy I used to be, the one who thought he'd be stuck in that shadow forever. My dad's still out there somewhere, probably spinning a version of the story that makes him the misunderstood father who did his best. Let him. I'm done fighting for space in his narrative. I've got my own now. Bigger, brighter, and all mine. Sometimes people ask me if I'd ever forgive him, if I'd ever let him back in my life. I don't know how to explain that it's not about forgiveness. It's about freedom. And I'm free. I get to wake up every morning knowing I'll never be erased again. And the best part? I get to hand that freedom to someone else, year after year, kid after kid, so they can stand on the stage of their own life, look every person who doubted them in the eye, and say, "You don't get to decide who I am." I do. That's the move that turned his perfect illusion upside down. Not the speech, not the scholarship, not the viral headlines, but the simple, stubborn choice to live in the light of my own truth, so bright, so real, that his shadow can't touch me anymore. And it never will.